a lot of pressure from the US. And if we know that food that is labelled has an effect on behaviour, what the hell are we going to do when we have no idea what crap we're eating? I mean, this is how the organic farming is being put under threat. Because once the labelling is removed, how is the consumer to determine whether the piece of meat they're buying is cloned, is contaminated with growth hormone? You know, it shouldn't be any surprise to you that Texas is the largest provider of prime beef in the US, and where do the biggest people live? Yeah? That growth hormone doesn't just stop in the beef. I mean, there's the physical evidence. I lived in Texas for 4.5 years. I mean, they're monsters. It's like living in a land of giants. Thank God Ritalin wasn't around when my young apprentice had his problems. But this is an extremely pernicious drug. This was in the Daily Mail. Literally, I think this was the beginning of the week. And, you know, here we have a situation, again, where the media are telling us what's going on. Look at the headline here, the sub-headline. Thousands of hyperactive children are being given Ritalin, which can stunt growth, or even the schizophrenic drugs. Are they victims of greedy drug firms and doctors too quick to diagnose a condition many say doesn't exist? In the US right now, and this is actually quoted in this article, the article's here if anybody wants to take a look at it. In the US, 10% of all school-age children are prescribed Ritalin. 10%. 10%. And it's increasing in the UK. From this article again, perhaps most disturbing is the suggestion that ADHD is nothing more than the invention of pharmaceutical companies who have used clinical trials to create a disease that can be treated with their drugs. Last year, the NHS spent 28 million on Ritalin alone. Now, Ritalin is a stimulant. I mean, basically it's likened to cocaine. I mean, we'd be mortified if any parent gave their kids cocaine. But this is effectively what we're doing. In fact, the doctors actually don't understand how Ritalin works because it's a stimulant, yet it has the opposite effect. It calms them down. And some of you may have seen a Panorama broadcast a few weeks ago where they were talking to families that were prescribing Ritalin. And this mother of a hyperactive young girl said, you know, well, yeah, it's nice to actually sort of see her calm and sitting at the table, but it's not my daughter. It's not my daughter. We're condemning these kids to a life of prescribed drugs. You know, we are, basically, it is becoming a zombie nation. And we're cutting away the possibility of any spiritual connect at any juncture in their life. Which, of course, is by design. And for the adults, then it's Prozac. And I had a doctor friend of mine, and I asked him, you know, why it was that, you know, out of the people that I knew, it was always more women that were on Prozac than it was the men. And he said, well, that's very easy. He said, because the guys have to be dead before they go see a doctor. He said, whereas the women are much more comfortable to go see their doctor, and the doctor is just too quick to prescribe Prozac. And then now what's happening is a lot of doctors have little more than a database. You know, what's your problem? Oh, stress? Shh. Oh, Prozac. You know, I mean, they're not even making any informed decision. It's just key in the information into the database, and they're being paid $250,000 a year to provide that information. It's outrageous. Oh, and obviously this was for my benefit. You know, the daily super pill for men over 50. Well, apparently, this is the basis, this drug is the same basis as this experiment here. Well, this was on the front page of The Independent at the beginning of this month, Friday the 2nd of November. And they tried it out fortunately, they tried it out in mice before they decided to offer it to the 50-year-old men. And this is on the front page of The Independent. It says, it can run for hours at 20 metres a minute without getting tired. It lives longer, has more sex, eats more without gaining weight. Could the science that created this be applied to humans? Yeah, bring it on. telling us, it's in our face. You know, we are a nation addicted to pills. Not because we want to be addicted, but because the pharmaceutical industry needs us to be addicted. It's critical. Big Pharma has a very, very simple philosophy. From the moment a life form is conceived until that life form deceases, it is a revenue stream. From conception to death. What is interesting in this book, The Corporate Crime, the guy, John Braithwaite, actually tries to understand the mentality. Because it actually rocks him that the people he's talking to, the people he's interviewing, all seem like nice family men. Individually. And I'm sure Joseph Mengele was a lovely guy. But collectively, these guys take on a completely different persona. There is not an ounce of humanity in their agenda. There's not an ounce of compassion. It is totally about profits. It's a bit like the American military trying to find ways to kill people remotely. You know, if you can remove the face-to-face contact, it's a lot easier to get people to do things that they wouldn't do if they can actually look in the whites of the eyes of the individual. So Codex. Codex is a very, very complex structure, and I mean, this is just sort of an introduction. But Codex consists of 27 different committees looking at a whole bunch of different aspects associated with the entire food chain. And you can look at this yourself. I will give you some websites later on to look at it. But there's two particular committees that really impact on everything else. And that is these two here. And this is the Nutrition and Foods for Special Dietary Uses, which is hosted by Germany, and Food Labelling, hosted by Canada. Now these two committees impact on all of the others put together. And so when I talk about Codex, in most cases I'm talking about these two committees. Because it's these two committees that are really setting the trend for where we're going on moving away from the choice of organic food and away from the choice of complementary and natural health care. This statement, and you have to forgive me for using the quote because this guy is a lawyer, so he has to use 100 words when probably 2 would do. But this is, I think, a pretty good summary of the whole thing. He says, Codex is the political equivalent of the current toxicology manuals because it endorses and promotes for international trade and consumption in the whole wide world everything from pesticides to irradiation, genetically engineered foods and synthetic analogues for drugs and nutrients in preference to biocompatible natural substances. Now what we're talking about here is a process of gradualism. So, if somebody says to you, oh, organic food, we're still going to have access to organic food in 2010, they're probably right. They're probably right. But if somebody says, oh, we're still going to have organic food in 2020, right now I would say they're probably wrong. Because this is the process of gradualism, and what the Codex committees do, because they're under phenomenal pressure from the pharmaceutical companies and the likes of Monsanto, they do it through gradualism. So it's little by little, push a little. And then every now and again they'll give a little, so they take your eye off the ball. I mean, as in France recently. In France, they said, okay, and what was announced in the media is the number of acres dedicated to organic farming would increase. And that was what hit the media. What they didn't say was that the number of acres that was going to be handed over to GM crops was going to increase at 3 times the rate. You have to find what's not written. The Codex was actually started in 1962, and I'm quite prepared to believe that the people who originally dreamed up the concept were, erring on the side of benevolence. It was only after the likes of Monsanto and the likes of the pharmaceutical industry saw the potential for reaping the benefits of Codex that they started to get on board here. And of course what we're talking about here is organisations that have basically bottomless pockets. But bear in mind that I said in 2002, the profitability of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies exceeded the profitability of the other 490 companies in the Fortune 500. Now these guys have got people, teams of people, working on strategies to maximize the opportunities brought about by the implementation of Codex Alimintarius. I mean, this, I'm going to show you, this is a real David and Goliath situation. And I wouldn't be here tonight if I didn't think that David had a chance. I think David's got more than a chance, but there's a lot of groundwork to do to really give David a chance. Codex serves the economic interests of Big Pharma, and what is really a concern is that the World Trade Organization will implement Codex using Napoleonic law. Now, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's hardly anybody in the room who knows what Napoleonic law is, because it's something that hasn't existed in the UK since 1215. Because in the UK, since Magna Carta, we've had common law. And what common law is that unless something is specifically banned, it's okay. Right? So unless something is specifically mentioned in a piece of legislation to outlaw it, it's okay. Napoleonic law is completely the opposite. Unless something is specifically mentioned, it's banned. And the way the pharmaceutical companies work and the way the food companies work is what they're trying to do with the Codex committees is make the testing process so outrageous and outrageously expensive that the only people that can afford to get things on the approved lists will be the Monsantos and the pharmaceutical companies. Nobody else will be able to afford to go through the rigorous tests that you have to go through to get a product onto the approved list. I mean, this is outrageous. It's completely outrageous. They nearly got away with this in the US in 1994. Now, I was actually living in the US at the time, and I didn't appreciate the significance of it, but I was aware that sort of people were hitting the streets big time, and they were always rallying at the Whole Food stores. Well, right across the US, hundreds of thousands, probably millions total, people hit the streets, and they were protesting against the implementation of Codex Alimintarius. And it was kept out of the international media. In fact, it was kept out of the limited national US media. It was only reported on a local basis. So the people in Texas who were protesting actually didn't realise the people in all the rest in the other cities around the States were also protesting. But people were writing to their senators, and eventually the Senate realised that actually there was such a groundswell of opinion here, they needed to do something about it. So this legislation, the DeShay legislation, which is the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, was implemented in 1994. And this effectively put a ring fence around the health food and complementary health and alternative therapy industries in the US. So what did the Codex Commission do? Just go, damn. Okay, let's turn our attention to Europe. So for the last 13 years, they've been, trying to eat away at the protectionism of the individual countries within the European states. They've been working on the basis that none of the European countries talk to each other, which they're right about. The British government has washed its hands of this. So, I mean, you should write to your MP, as I will talk about later. But the British government has completely washed its hands of this. The British government has said, we'll just do whatever we're told to do by the EU. Okay? Which is basically what has to happen anyway. Because the EU issues two things, directives and regulation. And if they issue a regulation, basically that is law. If they issue a directive, what they're saying is, look, okay, it doesn't have to be law right now. We're going to let you go through the charade of making it look like you're making the decision. But you have to actually implement the legislation. All the privatisation that's going on, it's not this government making the decision to privatise the industries. It's like the German government's not making the decision to privatise the Dutch railway system, or the French making the decision. It's EU directive that's coming down the chain. If you don't, there's some brochures at the back here on the EU, and it does actually try and spell it out in words of one syllable. So the DeShay legislation is a ring fence around this for the US, but as soon as the EU capitulates, the way the World Trade Organization operates is that if they've got a template in place in the EU, they can then say to every other part of the world, this is what you now have to do. And if you